Welcome to Breast Cancer Breakthroughs. Early stage estrogen receptor positive breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed breast cancer, and outcomes are generally good for people with this type of breast cancer. But researchers want to know, could these outcomes be even better? Are there ways that we can further minimize the chance of someone's breast cancer coming back or spreading? One reason that outcomes are good for estrogen receptor positive breast cancer is because we have treatments that directly target the estrogen receptor in different ways to stop the cancer from growing. These drugs, called hormone therapies or endocrine therapies, are so effective that they have become the standard of care for this type of breast cancer for decades. But could these treatments be improved? Could researchers find new treatments that could unlock better outcomes for patients? In today's episode of Breast Cancer Breakthroughs, we speak with former Komen grantee, Dr. Sean Fanning, about why hormone therapy works, but where progress is needed for better patient outcomes. We also speak with medical oncologist, Dr. Priya Rastogi, about new research and clinical trials that are changing the game for hormone therapy. Did you know that hormone therapy was the very first targeted cancer treatment? We asked Dr. Sean Fanning to tell us more about why hormone therapy works so well to treat some breast cancers.
So the significance of estrogen receptor in breast cancer is that 70 to 80% of breast cancer patients will have an overexpression of estrogen receptor in their tumors. That means that these tumors make more estrogen receptor than normal tissues. That means this presents us an opportunity to therapeutically target this protein that is critical for the development and pathology of breast cancer.
There are currently 3 main types of hormone therapies that are FDA approved to treat breast cancer. Dr. Fanning explained to us how they work.
So an aromatase inhibitor will function to starve the receptor of the endogenous estrogens that would fuel the breast cancer. Whereas a molecule like tamoxifen, which is called a selective estrogen receptor modulator, binds to the estrogen receptor where estrogen would normally bind. And in doing so, it essentially reprograms the estrogen receptor to, rather than being pathogenic like it would if estrogen is bound, it now has therapeutic activities. SERDs are termed selective estrogen receptor degraders. They'll further change the shape and the dynamic character of the receptor in such a way that the cell says, oh, this protein is not properly folded anymore. And when that happens, the cell has mechanisms in place called proteasomal degradation that basically acts as a garbage dump for any protein that's not properly folded. And what SERDs do is they take advantage of this native machinery of the cell and say, okay, get rid of the estrogen receptor everywhere.
To learn more about how the estrogen receptor and hormone therapies work in breast cancer, check out our video linked below. Fulvestrant was the first FDA-approved SERD, and it's been used to treat metastatic estrogen receptor-positive breast cancer since 2002. Researchers have been working hard to identify and develop additional SERDs since then, and the first new SERD since fulvestrant, called elacestrant, was just approved in 2023. We asked Dr. Fanning why there is so much interest in developing new SERDs.
So fulvestrant, within, let's say, a cultured cellular system, for example, works beautifully. That's because it's very potent, it's very effective. The issue with fulvestrant comes when you need to give it to a patient. And that's simply because in terms of pharmaceutical profiles, it is so poor that it can't be given as a pill. And rather, it has to be given as a painful intramuscular injection into the glutes. And so this was kind of the first real need for an oral SERD, was to develop something that's simply pharmaceutically better and easier on the patient.
Dr. Fanning also explained that another promise of SERDs is overcoming treatment resistance, which can result after long-term treatment with tamoxifen and aromatase inhibitors.
One way to really think about cancer and how it progresses is that it's genetically unstable and it's a rapid evolution, if you will. And so that's the advantage that cancer cells have and tumors have, is that they're always evolving and they're always changing and adapting to their environments. And so in the terms of, a typical patient who's undergoing hormone therapy, they might have this selective pressure, if you will, of a hormone therapy for 5 to 15 years. And hopefully in the course of the surgery, radiation, and potentially chemotherapy, that these tumors have been effectively taken care of. And this is also the case for the adjuvant hormone therapies, where hopefully all this is being taken care of. But if there's enough of a tumor burden going in, that these tumors can maybe just kind of go dormant while under the hormone therapy, then they get this selective little genetic instability such that they can evolve ways to get around the being sensitive to the hormone therapy.
To learn more about treatment resistance, check out our video linked below. Currently, the SERDs fulvestrant and elacestrant are only used to treat metastatic breast cancer. But is there a place for them in the treatment of early-stage breast cancer? The current standard of care for early estrogen receptor-positive breast cancer consists of initial local therapy, which is typically some combination of surgery and radiation. Patients then receive adjuvant hormone therapy for 5 to 10 years, depending on their risk of recurrence. This adjuvant hormone therapy regimen of tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitors has remained the standard of care for more than 20 years. Patients may also receive chemotherapy or a CDK4/6 inhibitor called abemaciclib during this time if they are at high risk of recurrence. We spoke with medical oncologist Dr. Priya Rastogi about ongoing clinical trials that are taking a new approach by using oral SERDs in early estrogen receptor-positive breast cancer.
With these trials, we have EMBER-4, which is evaluating imlunestrant. So imlunestrant is a oral selective estrogen receptor degrader, and it specifically targets and binds to the estrogen receptor and induces a change that results in degradation of estrogen. So it prevents the estrogen-mediated signaling and inhibits both the survival and growth of estrogen-expressing cancer cells. So EMBER-4 is a phase 3 study evaluating imlunestrant versus standard endocrine therapy in the adjuvant setting. So this is after patients have received standard care and then I have been on endocrine therapy for at least 2 to 5 years, then the randomization is to imlunestrant versus to continue on standard endocrine therapy. So this trial is for patients with hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, early stage breast cancer with an increased risk of recurrence based on both clinical and pathological features. Another study is the lidERA study. So this is evaluating giredestrant. So giredestrant is also a highly potent oral estrogen antagonist and degrader. And so lidERA is a phase 3 trial evaluating adjuvant giredestrant versus standard endocrine therapy in hormone receptor positive HER2 negative early stage breast cancer. So again, patients have finished their standard local, regional, and potentially systemic treatment, and then are randomized to giredestrant versus standard endocrine therapy. Patients who are eligible for the trial, again, have either intermediate or high-risk breast cancer. We then have camizestrant, which is also an oral potent SERD and a pure estrogen antagonist. So we have 2 studies in the early stage setting that are evaluating camizestrant. There's CAMBRIA 1 or NSABP B62, which is evaluating camizestrant versus standard endocrine therapy for 5 years. So patients who are eligible for this study have received at least 2 years of standard endocrine therapy, but up to 5 years of standard endocrine therapy. So patients have had their standard treatment and then have been on standard endocrine therapy for 2 years, but up to 5 years. Patients are then randomized to camizestrant versus continuing standard endocrine therapy for 5 years. And again, patients must have intermediate or high risk. So in this trial, patients continue for 5 years on either treatment, whether it's camizestrant or endocrine therapy. CAMBRIA 2 is an upfront study. So in this study, patients must have completed definitive local regional therapy with or without chemotherapy for intermediate or high-risk disease. And in this study, patients are randomized to camizestrant versus standard endocrine therapy. And then the planned duration in CAMBRIA 2 is 7 years of treatment in either treatment arm. Patients, again, must have intermediate or high risk disease.
Dr. Rastogi discussed the two different approaches the CAMBRIA trials are taking, testing oral SERD camizestrant in early estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. The CAMBRIA 1 trial is testing the effectiveness of starting camizestrant after 2 to 5 years of standard hormone therapy. And the CAMBRIA 2 trial is testing the effectiveness of starting camizestrant upfront. Both trials are comparing these regimens to the current standard of care. Dr. Rastogi explained how these two approaches are meeting the unmet needs of patients.
It's really exciting that with the CAMBRIA trials, we have them in two settings within early stage breast cancer. So for CAMBRIA 1, patients are randomized to receive either the camizestrant or hormonal therapy up to 5 years. But this is after completing at least 2 years of standard endocrine therapy. So this study is assessing if patients receive some standard endocrine therapy and then switch to a different therapy, will this improve outcomes? So patients can sometimes develop resistance while on endocrine therapy, and so a switch to a different endocrine therapy may improve outcomes. So CAMBRIA 1 is evaluating if camizestrant will be better in terms of efficacy and safety for extended adjuvant therapy compared to standard adjuvant endocrine therapy. CAMBRIA 2 is for patients intermediate or high risk for recurrence. These patients will be randomized upfront to receive either standard endocrine therapy or camizestrant for 7 years. So patients, again, have their standard local regional therapy, chemotherapy if needed, but then at that point, they're randomized to camizestrant or to standard therapy. So this upfront study is assessing whether starting an oral SERD versus receiving standard endocrine therapy will improve outcomes. CAMBRIA 2 then is evaluating camizestrant for efficacy and safety in the adjuvant therapy compared to standard endocrine therapy for patients with hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative early stage breast cancer.
According to Dr. Rastogi, new oral SERDs are currently being tested in patients at an intermediate or high risk of recurrence. To learn more about factors that determine risk of recurrence, check out episode 8 of Breast Cancer Breakthroughs linked below. In episode 9 of Breast Cancer Breakthroughs, also linked below, we also told you about how CDK4/6 inhibitors are also being incorporated into the treatment of people with early estrogen receptor positive breast cancer at high risk of recurrence. We asked Dr. Rastogi how she envisions doctors will personalize these treatments if they become available to ensure the right drug is getting to the right patient.
What I think is really important with all these studies, and if the oral SERDs show that there are improvement of outcomes for patients who receive it, what will be really important is that there's more treatment options available to patients. So then with tamoxifen, aromatase inhibitors, or in the right subset of patients who are eligible to receive abemaciclib with hormone therapy, then physicians are able to decide based on efficacy and side effect profile which agents may be most appropriate for their patients. So we're having more agents in the field are just better for patients and physicians to make the right choices based on efficacy and toxicity.
Overall, Dr. Rastogi was excited about the potential that oral SERDs have for patients.
I think all the oral SERDs, it's a really exciting time just because they are a new class of drugs. So any of these trials would be fine for these patients, depending what's open at their center and the location. So I just think it's an exciting time for this whole class of drugs.
Thank you all so much for watching. We hope you've come away feeling empowered to work with your doctor to make treatment decisions based on your treatment goals and lifestyle. Here at Komen, we are committed to bringing you evidence-based information to empower you to make decisions in partnership with your medical team as you navigate your experience with breast cancer. Don't forget to sign up for reminders for Breast Cancer Breakthroughs. We've linked the homepage below. And finally, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please take 2 minutes to fill out our short survey linked in the description below.